Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar in the HR Changing the Game series. So I'm Paul Routley of Think Selling Sales Solutions, and today we're going to be talking about the Peter Principle, but more importantly, how companies can avoid falling into the trap of the Peter Principle when promoting salespeople. And today I'm joined by Jesper Præstensgaard of Humanostics. Jesper, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much, Paul.
So some viewers and listeners won't be familiar with yourself or the work you do at Humanostics. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, sure. I've worked 30 plus years in corporate world. I grew up in a company where the use of psychometric tools were sort of an important part. All young managers coming up through the ranks, they got trained in these tools. And the whole idea was that created a common language around people. So I've worked with, in this case, the predictive index for more than 30 years, and I consider it sort of an essential part of my leadership toolbox. Today, I work at Humanostics, managing partner there, and at Humanostics, we actually spend all our time advising companies on the use of predictive index, how they get the most out of it, and advising them how they can use it in all different kinds of contexts in the employee life cycle.
Fantastic stuff.
And I'm based in Copenhagen. I should say that as well. So international thing, this.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you. So let's jump straight in. And the first question I've got for you is, what is the Peter Principle? Can you explain to the viewers and listeners what the Peter Principle is?
I can. It's actually an old principle. It was years back in '68 where Dr. Lawrence J. Peter, he suggested that there was a principle whereby in a company, a hierarchy, that every employee tends to rise to his or her level of incompetence. And that doesn't sound nice, of course, but that is something that I believe most of us who's been in business for some years will testify to, that we've seen examples of that. So that's the Peter Principle. It comes from the name of the guy who actually brought it up initially.
Fantastic stuff. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure many of the viewers and listeners will have experienced or witnessed the Peter Principle in action. I know I have. Dare I say, I've been the rare beneficiary of the Peter Principle on a couple of occasions. But the question is, and as you rightly say, that it was first identified in 1968. So how is it that over 50 years on, we're still seeing this? We're still seeing companies operating the Peter Principle. It's still operating alive and well in companies, and companies are still falling into that trap. Why is that it's still with us over 50 years later?
That's because we all have a tendency of looking at current performance and think that we can extrapolate that into the future. So, and it's interesting because if you look at the financial sector, most of us have some sort of a saving, pension funds or whatnot, and we will see in all the papers that it says that past performance is no guarantee of future performance, right? That's sort of the disclaimer that they always come up with. And still, when we talk about people and we talk about how will a person do in a given role, we tend to extrapolate from current performance. So when people rise to the level of incompetence, we say, oh my God, this person was so competent before. How come it doesn't work today? Well, that's because the requirements are different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I suppose the question that people want to understand is, we know what the Peter Principle is. We know that it's still there. What can they do to try and avoid that trap? Because we're still seeing that. We're still seeing companies falling into that trap. And I agree with everything you said there. It's a great analogy. But how can companies avoid falling into that trap?
Yeah. So what you're looking at, you're now in a situation which we often are, where we're looking into the future and we're trying to predict how someone is going to do in a given role. The first thing you want to make sure you understand what is required in this role. And if you're talking about a promotion, chances are that what this person did in the past as an individual contributor, for example, that those requirements to the future roles are quite different. So you want to start looking at the job and say, what would it require? I mean, we spoke about in this example as a sales manager. So now you have this, the brilliant salesperson nails the budgets every time and exceeds it. So sort of the model salesperson. Now you're looking for that sales manager, you know, say, who should we take? Well, let's take the best person we have doing sales. And then 6 months later, you find yourself in a situation where you say, oh my God, I lost a great salesperson and I got a bad sales manager. So it's a double whammy, if you like. So you gotta profile the job. You gotta understand what is required, and it's very different. In this case, being a sales manager, delivering results through others, as opposed to being that individual contributor who's great at going out there, landing the business in whatever environment that business is landed in.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because I think, having experienced that personally and seen this when I've managed teams and led teams, there's a number of challenges that salespeople face when they make that step from contributor to sales manager or sales leader. I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen is the change in relationship. That certainly if they're popular within a team, that they have close relationships, they're almost friendships with colleagues. One of the big challenges is separating themselves, and that's almost preparation, that they're moving from a member of the team to suddenly being in control of the team.
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
And you can say that when you're doing that, you would want to have as many data points as you can to help you, predict that future performance. And if we're saying that current performance is not it, then I'm not saying that you shouldn't look at it. It's one data point. But what other data points can you now gather that would help you move the odds of being successful with, in this case, the promotion to a sales manager? And one of the things that we know psychometrics is a discipline within psychology, and this is where psychology meets mathematics and statistics. So it's all a matter of improving the odds. What are the chances of someone? And we know that if we measure what naturally motivates a person, we have a great possibility of actually predicting how this person will behave. And so that means that it's not enough to go to that individual sales contributor and get that confirmation, say, oh, so you're really interested in the job. Oh, yes, my God, the paycheck is bigger. I can go home and tell my mother that I've been promoted. I get my own parking space outside the company and whatnot. The person will likely just say, check. Oh, yeah, I'm dead eager to do that. You also gotta understand what naturally motivates this person so that you can see if that matches with the requirements in this particular job. Does that make sense, Paul? I think Paul is fading out.
Back, we had a minor technical glitch. Back in the room.
Back in the room. Okay. So did you have my brilliant conclusion there? Or?
I did. It was wonderful. And you raised it, again, some really good points. And I think with these tools, should we be discounting potential candidates, or should we be using these tools as areas to focus on, to maybe areas of development? So when they're moving to this role, these are highlighting areas that we could be developing that person, growing that person, their skill set.
You can definitely use it to develop people. But if we sort of take that aside and maybe get back to that, then the first thing is, how do you improve chances of success with this particular promotion? And if you've profiled the job, if you've measured what actually naturally motivates the person, and again, what naturally motivates the person is not necessarily what that person says. But that person will, potentially say anything to get the job, right? So it's a matter of understanding what truly motivates the person. When you have that, you can actually see if there is an overlap. You mentioned yourself, Paul, that suddenly you take an individual contributor, you make this person, in this case, head of a team. Suddenly you got to deliver a result through others. Suddenly you got to, potentially push people a little bit, at least encourage them to get on with things. You may put yourself in situations where, you're not necessarily the most popular because there are tough decisions to be made. You may be pushed into doing things a little faster than you would be naturally inclined to do, not necessarily having all the data available that you would rather have. Many things mean that you're a little out of tune with what's naturally required. You need to understand that. And then you take all these data points together with past performance, together with everything else you can find on the person. You build it up and you say, how well does that match? Once you've looked at that, you said, now I will promote this person into this position. Now you're coming back to what you brought up, Paul, and that's the development. So what can you now do to help this person once this person is in the position?
Absolutely.
And to me, that's where self-awareness becomes the key, right? Because there are many situations out in the real world where we end up promoting a person because we simply need to fill that position now, right? Now, if you're in that situation, you're still well advised to look at how that person naturally fits into that role. And to the extent that that's not a natural fit or complete fit, if you are aware of where those gaps are, you're much better able to help that person. Yeah, makes sense?
Absolutely. I mean, we've had conversations in the past about my experience of assessments. And when I first came in, got involved with assessments, it was about self-awareness. I probably came into it from a slightly different perspective. I needed an assessment to help me to understand a particular situation where a salesperson had been promoted to sales manager. His replacement was struggling to build a relationship with a very established client. We couldn't understand why that wasn't working. As soon as we had that insight, we understood externally what the issues were, that there was a clash of personalities, a clash of behavior. But the most powerful thing and why I suddenly became a big advocate of assessments was that it gave that person that insight. He understood why his behavior was having that impact that it did, why it was impacting his communication, what he then needed to do to adjust his communication style, how he approached those situations. And that self-awareness was so powerful, and it stuck with him for many, many years. And I still coach him and work with him now, and we still have that conversation back going 15 years ago about that first moment of insight. And I think that's the most powerful thing that these tools deliver.
And I'm with you. I agree entirely. What's important to also remember is that we all have our natural preferences. And what we know is that those natural preferences, they tend not to change once you're a mature adult. We all get to that point sooner or later, but so once you're a mature adult, your natural preferences tend to stay. With self-awareness comes the ability to say, I don't necessarily need to go on autopilot. I may have a natural preference to be very meticulous and methodical. I know that in this position, I don't always have the time to do that because we got to get things done. So I need to dial down that natural preference. And you have all these natural preferences, which with self-awareness comes the ability to hopefully navigate it by dialing up or dialing down, as you just explained as well, Paul.
Fantastic stuff. So we'll cover where we've got some questions have come in, so we'll cover those in a second. But just before we go to that, you work with teams and individuals all over the world, as I do as well. Are there any best practices that companies should be adopting to try and avoid this situation, but also should be putting into practice to enhance this process?
First of all, gut feeling is just that. It's some people have that and it's right. We all have gut feelings, but some people can actually rely on it. Most of us cannot. So support at least your gut feeling with data, right? So whenever you get into these things, be rigorous around understanding that you're now predicting something into the future, and how do you best do that? The interesting thing is that in the discipline of HR, at times it seems like it's all about what I think, feel, and believe in, right? As opposed to most other business disciplines where when you do a projection into the future, you are being counted on to produce predictions based on solid data. Right? So I would say gather as many data points as you can, because that will help you make better decisions. It will also help you when you subsequently have to help coach, guide an individual in that particular role.
Fantastic stuff. So do we have any questions? I've got a couple of questions that have been emailed over. Do we have any questions live on the call today that anyone would like to put to myself or Jesper? Okay, well, obviously very contented audience live on the call. So we'll go to a couple of questions we've had emailed in. So the first question is from Stephen in London. And Paul, Jesper, you've mentioned using tools such as assessments within the process. What should I be looking to identify when promoting a salesperson to a sales management role? I mean, that's a very good question, Stephen. So, Jesper, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I can try, because it's a very broad person that it assumes that there is such a thing as a generic sales manager position, and that there is not. It'll be different circumstances, different companies, different ways of doing things. So some of the things you could be looking for is things like the ability to drive things independently, the ability to be result oriented to the extent of saying, yes, now we got to move on. I've heard enough. Close the discussion. Move on. The preference of setting your own agenda, because now you actually are ahead of a team, and you're not just a team player. You're ahead of the team. Those would be examples, some generic examples of what you in most sales manager positions would be looking for, but you would be looking at that role specifically, and you would hopefully try and profile that role to understand exactly what it is you're looking for in that sales manager.
Fantastic. Well, that actually works rather well with the second question I've got, because we've got a question from Lisa in Birmingham. And Jesper, I've heard the term profile, the role used. Can you explain a little bit more about what profiling a role involves and what that might look like?
Well, let's start another place. You may have heard about a hiring manager approaching HR, or for that matter, an external recruiter, and saying, I need this new sales executive. I need someone who's extrovert, good with people, great team player, who drives things independently, who is quick, result oriented, get things done quickly, methodical in his or her approach to things, quality conscious, and able to think out of the box. And people will sort of nod and say, yeah, okay, that could be sort of a job advert for this particular position. But when you then dive into it, what I've just described is a person that doesn't exist, because I've described what sort of lies at either end of a spectrum for different personality traits. So how do you get beyond that discussion where the hiring manager say, well, I don't want to listen to this, just get on with it. I've been very clear with you. Just go and find that person. Well, what you can do is you can try and get some objectivity into that process. And that objectivity, in the case of a predictive index, we have a questionnaire that takes you through a number of statements. And you would tick off and say, what are the things that you believe are important to be a success in this particular job? And that will automatically then, science and all that, and the way the system is constructed, then develop that profile you're looking for in terms of what personality traits you see as being most likely to succeed in this particular role. And that's a very good way of getting that reducing that subjectivity. There will always be elements of subjectivity, unfortunately or fortunately, but you would want to have as many objective things in there as possible, and that's a way of doing that.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you very much. So, well, Stephen, Lisa, I hope that's answered your questions. Jesper, thank you very much. I think that's been really, really useful, and I hope everyone has found that a useful call today.
I think there was a comment from. I think there was a comment from Isabel. Was there a message from you, Isabel?
Isabel, yeah, absolutely. Let's just pull that. So, Isabel has asked, how do you achieve or be aware of self-awareness? I think that's a very, very good question. So, Jesper, do you want to answer that one? It's a very good question.
That is the $1 million question, because you can say that with experience, I become more self-aware. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You will find very experienced people who are completely oblivious of how they actually come across to others. So self-awareness is actually something that starts with you trying to understand what motivates you, not what sort of social etiquette would expect you to do, but what truly motivates you. And when you get to that point, then you have that ability to hopefully navigate a lot better, knowing your preferences and knowing what you are supposed to deliver in a certain role. Make sense, Isabel?
Agreed. Wonderful stuff. Well, I think we don't have any other questions. I think that's pretty much all we've got time for on this particular session. But thank you everyone for joining the call. Jesper, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure as always, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Yes. Bye-bye.